And that takes us to our final game of the Week 5 previews and predictions out to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and what could be the key matchup of the century. The number 2 Georgia Bulldogs hit the road to take on the number 4 Alabama Crimson Tide. Both teams riding high, hoping to come out with a huge win to gain some momentum heading forward into the season. 7:30 kickoff on ABC/ESPN Plus. Georgia favored on the road by 2 in this one in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Brad, look, we have our own personal opinions on this game. Hopefully we can leave it out for these picks, but who do you have coming out on top and what could be one of the most anticipated matchups of this year?
Man, this is so fun. And to the SEC schedule makers, man, to put this one and to put it so early in the season, I mean, it's a treat for us as fans. So many storylines in this one. Obviously, Kirby's not facing his protege and Nick Saban anymore. We got Kalen DeBoer on the sidelines. And guys, I will say really the first time that we get to see what a Kalen DeBoer team is. And I say that, and that's no disrespect to the teams Alabama has played so far, but this is the first test. And, keep that in mind too. USF did keep it very, very close with Alabama a few weeks ago, but we're going to find a lot about Kalen DeBoer and how he does in big-time SEC games. Mentioned just so many storylines, starting with Alabama, of course, Jalen Milroe, one of the most dynamic playmakers in the country. Truly, once again, we talk about dual threats, and he fits that. Jan Miller, Justice Haynes, there at running back there, formed a 1-2 punch, and then the 17-year-old phenom at wide receiver, Ryan Williams. This guy is so explosive. He looks like the next great Alabama receiver. Guys, a big question mark, though, is we know Alabama lost a lot off that defense, just whether it was transfer portal or guys leaving. And don't get me wrong, they bring back some very, very talented guys. Malachi Moore, Lawson, Jahad Campbell. Of course, they bring in Michigan transfer Keon Sabb. They brought in LT Overton. Just a lot of guys, but Alabama did lose a lot. So I think that's one storyline. Guys, and I will say, you look at who these two teams have played so far. This is by far the Georgia. This is the best team that Alabama's faced. It's the best team that Georgia's faced. But, breaking this down more, for Georgia, this is the best offense they face. For Alabama, this is the best defense they face. So that is just really interesting to me. I think, jumping over to Georgia, they're finally getting healthy up front. And I think that's a big point, because we saw Kentucky gash them a little bit. We saw a lot of missed tackles. And I think Carson Beck is, he's looked at that Kentucky game where he was not anywhere close to his best. And Georgia needs him to be on his A++ game. This is a chance for Trevor Etienne to really step up and make some plays. And that Georgia receiving core, they need to step up and make some plays. Guys, to me, this comes down to can Georgia's defense slow down Jalen Milroe and force him to beat them in the pocket? And to me, it's going to come down to two guys. It comes down to Jalen Walker, who is kind of a jackknife. He does a little bit of everything for Georgia, and Raylan Wilson, one of those linebackers that he's got legitimate 4.4 speed, that I think these two guys are going to be tasked with spying Jalen Milroe. For that reason, very, very, very close game. I think it comes down to a late score in the fourth quarter. I'm going with Georgia. Obviously, I think Alabama has got a legit chance to win this one. And if Georgia turns the ball over, and the fact that this one's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama wins this one. But I think Georgia just makes a couple more plays on defense, a couple more tackles for loss to put Alabama behind the chains. And I think Jalen Milroe comes up short, and I'm taking Georgia in a very, very close one.
Wow, Brad, great pick. Rooster, I'll turn it over to you. Who wins this SEC primetime matchup?
Well, we know that this is easily the biggest game of the year to this point. This has a lot of future implications down the line in the SEC championship game and so on.
Sure.
But I think the big factor in this game is going to be explosive plays. And outside of maybe a couple of plays here and there, I mean, Georgia really has not had many explosive plays this season. And Alabama has had, I don't know if you've heard, he's only 17. If you've only heard that, I've only heard that about 8,000 times. Only 17.
Yep.
And he seems to score a touchdown every time the ball touches his hand. Ryan Williams for Alabama.
Sure.
But Georgia's defense is absolutely loaded. They've got first-round picks everywhere. This may not be a defensive line. This may not be a defensive line of the past where we've had Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker. But this secondary is one of the best we've seen in a long time. You've got a first-round draft pick back there. We've also got a plethora of linebackers. So I think Georgia is really going to do I think their defense will be able to put on a strong performance this weekend. And Alabama, as long as Georgia can take away the deep shots, I think that they're able to come away with the game because, I mean, Milroe, he seems to perfect the long ball, but anything in between, he really struggles with that. And I do think that Georgia, they're very strong. They've got Carson Beck on the offense, ETN. But I think something we're overlooking is Ratledge being done for at least about 2 months until the Georgia-Florida game. And that's going to be a big blow to the offensive line. But at the end of the day, I've got to hedge my bets. I think I'm going to take Alabama Tide. I'm taking the Crimson Tide to win the game. It may be an overreaction, but I just don't have much confidence in the Dogs right now. But I got to hedge my bets. You know, we can't show bias towards the audience.
Well, look, there's no bias from any of us, but coming from a current UGA student, that's got to be heartbreaking for the Dogs fans to hear. Coming from such a loyal,
confidence is low right now, Nate.
Loyal, loving fan that bleeds black and red for the Dogs, but nonetheless, y'all bring up so many great points. But I think y'all missed one. Or maybe not missed it, but didn't hit on it. When we look at big games like this, these games come down to who wins in the trenches. And that's what this game's going to come down to. Brad, you mentioned it. You mentioned the D-line for Georgia. They have not been the same, and you mentioned it too. They have not been the same since the last few years ago when they had the best defense to ever come through. And granted, look, you're not going to get that year after year. That's impossible to replicate what they had back in, I believe, 2021, 2022. But they've got some playmakers playing on defense nonetheless. You talk about the weakness of the offensive line. You talk about Ratledge being out the rest of the year. That's a big blow, not just size-wise and experience, but leadership. When you got a guy out there playing week after week, day after day in practice, it builds confidence. And some of those younger offensive linemen look to those guys for leadership and for direction. So it's really disappointing to lose a guy like that. Nonetheless, it's really going to come down to, like Brad said, it's going to come down to Jalen Walker, and I want to mention another guy, Tyron Ingram Dawkins. I think he's another guy to look out for to plug the holes up front and to keep Jalen Milroe in the pocket. If they cannot contain him in the pocket with a 4-man rush or a 3-man rush, they're going to have to pull a linebacker or a nickel to spy on Jalen Milroe, and that's going to open up the secondary. That's not good for Georgia. I know they got some absolute dogs in the secondary, but it's going to be tough when you got to pull another guy from that area to keep an eye on the quarterback. On the offensive side for Georgia, they've had a lot of trouble running the ball this year. We were at the Clemson game, and it was even against it. And granted, Clemson has a good defensive line, but they were not getting anything up front. And so you have to wonder, are they going to have to do the play action? Will the play action work? Are they going to have to set up some screen plays? That's going to be the biggest question mark. It's really hard for me to pick in this game for both reasons, but I'm going to take the Dogs on a close one. I think Carson Beck and his poise, this is a big test for him. We've seen Carson Beck play in big games, but this would be the biggest one he's played in thus far besides last year against Bama. Does he want a revenge game? Does he want to come out and prove himself? If he comes out and proves himself in this game, he's going to jump up in the Heisman contender race, no doubt about it. Give me the Dogs in a very, very close one. I think not only does it come down to the trenches, it comes down to the kicking game. I think Georgia's got the better kicker in this one. We talk about this too all the time. Is kickers have one job. They get a couple of chances in the game. If not, you're going to see a lot of cobras in the stands like we see every weekend. Bandy kicker misses it left, and then next thing you know, you got cobras. So it's going to come down to the kickers, but give me Georgia in a close one. Be sure to subscribe down below. Thanks for helping us grow our audience week after week. We've reached over 200 subs. Be sure to comment down below who you think will win in this big SEC showdown prime time at 7:30. We'll see you next week. It's time to break the huddle. Hey, YouTube, did you like what you saw? Be sure to subscribe down below and check out these videos coming up for this week.